this is installment 3, I think, Alan, of our conversations about conversation.
We're moving on, are you? We're moving on. Great to be here with you.
And we were just talking about conversations that we both regularly have, where groups of people, teams, boards, cohorts, peer groups, whatever it might be, they get into a room and there are unilateral decisions made that some people in the room are not happy with, but they don't say anything in the room. They don't call point of order or whatever the process might be, but they complain very loudly after the meeting, which of course undermines the whatever's going on.
Yes.
And I reckon I have these kind of conversations once a week.
Ian, you know, we started chatting that way when we first connected this morning. I've had 2 of those conversations this morning.
There you go.
both with members of a board of directors.
Well, I was having a conversation earlier, hence the diagram behind me, because this is the cause of it, I believe, a lack of shared view. So what's happening is people want to live in 2 worlds. You know, you've got your world and I've got mine, and never the twain shall meet.
Yes. Yeah.
Instead of saying, well, you've got your view and I've got mine, but isn't it wonderful that we can reach ours?
Somewhere in the middle.
It's, I mean, and that's been my major model now for 32 years, is helping people to reach this shared view.
Yep.
And I talk to people around the fact that you need a shared view around, I call them the 7 macro areas, and then there's 5 micro areas. And I thought it would be useful today to maybe look at one of those 7 macro areas, which is culture.
Right.
You can see me over here, can you, Alan?
I can, yes.
Culture. I was watching a video with a young guy, Matthias Di Stefano, who's an Argentinian guy, I think.
Right.
He's got wonderful insights into consciousness. But I saw this interview, and what leaped out at me is the interviewers asked him, what is culture? And he just straight away responded, well, it's what we cultivate. And so these people in meetings, first of all, unilateral decisions shouldn't be allowed. There should be a decision-making process. And I don't know about your experience, but the majority of executives, business owners, people that I meet don't have a decision-making process. It staggers me.
Yep. And while you were writing on the board, I started to send Jen a message to say, would you send Ian Berry my matrix for decision making?
There you go. And I've got a basic process that I have now probably given to 1,000 people over the course of the journey, because culture has a couple of factors. I mean, often it's the way we do things around here, but I think that's only part of the equation.
Oh,
it's actually who we are. It is what we're cultivating.
Yep.
But critically, it's having a shared view about our behaviours when we're in the room together, when we're one-on-one, whatever it is, it's about our behaviours. And I'm sure this has been your experience too. Organisations talk about values, and what they are is 9 times out of 10 is words on a wall.
Yep.
They're not behaviours that people live.
Yep.
And I love when I was thinking about our conversation today, I love your above and below the line behaviours. So I thought, let me just bring that up and you can take us through, because I think it's a wonderful way to start to put behaviours, because in my view, behaviours around values, so having behaviours for your values, that is the crutch of culture.
Yeah. Yep. I concur with you. I'd like to add one little piece that I think can be added and that is that 90% of the talk I hear about culture is about our ideal or marketing blurb culture.
Yes, yes.
We talk about all the things you do that are good and ideal, and we leave out our dysfunctional culture.
Yep.
And that then prevails into me having espoused values to which the behaviours of my dysfunction don't match.
Yep.
Or in fact, sometimes violate. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I go as far as to say, if you've only got words for your values, you actually don't have values. You just got words. Because unless they're behaviours, there's no substance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And any team, cohort, peer group, whatever, that doesn't have a shared view around how we behave with one another and how we behave with employees and how we behave with other stakeholders is not serious.
Yeah, I agree. I concur.
Can you just enable the screen share?
Yes,
and I'll...
certainly. Let me see. How did I go about doing that? Press there, share, open system preferences. Do I? That's not normally what happens. Let me try that.
There's a line there where it says you can multiple hosts or something.
Yeah, let me just go see if it'll let me go back. There we go. It has. Oh, how about that? Screen share. Go there. Multiple participants. There we go, Mr. Berry. You have it.
So here is your wonderful.
Yeah.
So
Ian,
there's a lot here, but take us through the behind it, what was behind it, and how it was developed.
Ian, in the 90s, I was given some roles in universities that I felt inadequate for. And so I set about with the intention of doing a PhD. And I started a field research project, which ended up lasting for 12 years.
Right.
And I assessed over that 12 years, I assessed over 3,400 business negotiations. And I developed a check sheet, and it was half of the page that you see in front of you on the screen. So essentially, if you block out what's on the right-hand side and only look at the left-hand side, I had a checklist and said, how many times did somebody say something restrictive and somebody said yet? Yep.
Yep.
How many times did somebody accept what somebody said? How many times did somebody paraphrase? How did somebody acknowledge what the last comment was? How many of them repeated back information? How many of them clarified, confirmed? How many reframed? And of course, reframing is your primary tool for shifting thinking and resolving conflict.
Yeah.
Or how many of them express gratitude? And the other half of the sheet was how many times did people say, yeah, but? Neutralize, deny, ignore, sidestep, interrupt, disagree, ridicule, make a unilateral decision, or make excuses. And Ian, I will ask you to have a guess what the ratio was across 3,400 business negotiations.
Well, my gut feel would be that there was more below the line and less above.
A lot.
It would have been, yeah, a big percentage.
Ian, the average person I asked the question says somewhere, they all say we do more below. I've never had anybody claim that we do above, ever.
Incredible, isn't it?
Ian, if you look at those 10 things in the above the line, everybody
connection's gone wobbly.
But it's not common.
You know, you're
Just over 90. Oh, is that better? How's that?
Yeah, I think we've got a bit of a connection challenge, but let's see how we go.
Let's let me just move it about a bit and see if I can get a better one. Let me try that. Is it the speech or the visual?
Yeah, it was a speech, but it's clear now. So
Clear. Oh, good. Good. Let me know if it does, and I'll flick the camera off just to be clear.
Yeah.
Ian, the bottom below the line came out of males 9-1.
Incredible.
And females 83%. So it was 8.5 to 1.7.
We've still got a lot of men, haven't we, in our society,
and
who don't
Ian, the average person thinks that it's more below the line, but not a lot. So we actually do believe that we do above the line far more than we do.
Yep. Well, I think that's probably comes back to what you're talking about, the marketing blurb about culture.
Yes.
You know, we kind of, I'm staggered by the amount of managing directors and chief executives that I've met over my 35 years of doing this that didn't have a clue about what was going on in their organizations.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they've never, I once took an executive, a very senior executive in an organization that had about 25,000 employees.
Yeah.
And they had some major factories. And I walked the factory floor the previous day and found out a whole lot of information that after talking to the executives team the day before and then walking the factory floor, there was such a disconnect between what the executive team thought was going on and what was actually going on.
Yeah.
And this senior executive had never been to talk to the people on the factory floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he thought there was all this above the line behavior, but what was actually going on was mostly below.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's a common story that you've seen.
Yeah.
As well. I think the role of chief executives and managing directors is overrated.
The role is overrated, or the appropriate execution of the role is overrated?
Yes, I think both, but
right.
But yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head with the latter one. I must say that I have met some wonderful managing directors and chief executives over the years, and have been fortunate to have some of them as my clients, but they are in the minority, not the majority.
Yeah.
Most of them are incompetent, overpaid fools.
Ian, if you think about it and formulate a really strong opinion, will you let us know?
Well, I promised my dear friend who passed a decade ago, 11 years ago now, that I'd never die wondering. But you know, it's just, I think we're at a point in our society where we just need to face up to the fact that, you know, nobody deserves to be paid 300 times more than the average employee.
Yeah.
And yet that's typical now.
Yes.
Yep. It used to be an accepted benchmark 30 years ago that 30 times was reasonable. 300 times is insanity and greed personified, in my view.
Ridiculous.
And so we have these overrated people who really don't know what's going on, being paid exorbitant amounts because they might be keeping the share price at a certain level or whatever.
Yes. And
yet the well-being of their employees is being totally ignored. There's no productivity that you could really speak of. Things are a mess for the reasons that we're talking about. And
Yes.
Just recently in Australia, as you well know, we've had a bunch of greedy bastards trying to, manipulate the energy market.
Yeah. Yes.
And, thankfully, the regulator said we're not having it.
Yeah.
And yet we see this kind of thing, don't we?
Excuse me. Pardon me.
And it comes back to, there's not a shared view around the things that really matter, and behaviour is mostly below the line instead of above the line, and therefore people are not having conversations that actually count.
Yeah.
And hopefully we're helping folk to, have some insights, do some things that will help them to have conversations that matter.
Yeah. You're speaking, and I can't help but the term unilateral decision making is jumping off the page at me.
Yes.
And I just wonder, in that process you're describing, and it's almost exactly the replica of the 2 phone calls I had this morning, where in one of the instances, I'm familiar with the group, I'm familiar with the organization, I know the board, and the founder of this organization is 25 years in, is still the chairman of the board. And part of their business is they actually consult in succession planning. And I go, if you're going to have succession planning, how do you have the chairman for 25 years?
Yep, insanity.
Now, Ian, the good news is 6 months ago, he decided he was stepping down and he appointed a woman. And please note, I said he appointed a woman.
Yeah. Progress.
And on the morning she turned up for a first board meeting, he said to me, look, I've rethought it and I'm going to return back to the chair.
Oh, no.
Do you think that's okay,
Ian? No. Look,
now,
I think there was
that happened and it wasn't discussed. That happened and it wasn't discussed openly for 3 board meetings.
Staggering,
isn't it?
I think there's.
I just want to say that because it's real. It happened this morning. I've got somebody talk, and you're saying somebody's, we're overpaying fools, which sounds like an erratic overstatement. But I just want to give the example that cannot be called anything else but foolish and inappropriate.
No, and it's not, the statement I made is not, it's a carefully considered statement based on evidence I've seen.
I got it.
Over 30 years.
I knew that it was a carefully considered statement. I just wanted for the viewers just to be sure that it wasn't an overstatement.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And I think, I was going to say before it came to my head, I think there was a film called Men Behaving Badly.
Oh, yes.
And this is an example of that. The fact that we still don't treat women in an equal way it leaves me speechless.
Yes.
In Australia, they're more than 50% of the population.
Yep.
And yet they still don't get paid the same as a man for doing the same job. They're still disrespected and dishonoured. We've got a pandemic of domestic violence, most of which is committed by men. As I understand the stats, we're in deep trouble. And on the other hand, I do have conversations with some really good men who don't quite know how to go about being fair and being respectful and honouring women. They don't quite know how to go about it. And these are good men. And there are other good men that I talk to who agree wholeheartedly with what we're trying to do, but don't quite know how to go about it. And I think this is because we've got an entrenched, dare I say, Alan, we've got an entrenched patriarchy.
Culture.
And that's dominating a lot of cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a whole bunch of men who don't know when to let go.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got a whole bunch of other men who don't know how to tell someone that they've got to let go.
Yes.
You know, because I would say in this board that you're talking to, what the hell are the other members doing?
I find it staggering that, see, you and I have both had enough experience in senior exec groups and boards. There's no way I could sit in a board meeting and see an injustice take place without me calling on it straight away.
No, I couldn't do that. But what I'm referring to, and I think this is the challenge that we have, is that there are many men as well as many women who don't know how to have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things that I've cultivated, as you know, I've turned the phrase "we need to talk" into a positive.
Yes.
So that when I call up somebody and I say we need to talk, you would know that I'm coming from a positive, generous, grateful place.
Yes.
Whereas the phrase is often perceived negatively. But I think that's one of the challenges is in most organisations there isn't a pathway to open the conversation when there's difficulty, disagreement, or conflict. Now, we did touch on that, just a sec. We did touch on that in the first video about your wonderful sort of phrases, but maybe there's at a deeper level, because I come across many people, women and men, who want to have these conversations. They just don't know how.
Is it that they don't know how, or they are running through their brain that it's difficult often enough for them to create inertia and not take the step to have it, and use the excuse, I don't know how, when it is, I just haven't stepped into it?
Yeah, I think you've hit a really important area. There is a lot of fear.
Yeah.
You know, the old adage, you know, if you did that, that would be a career-threatening move.
Yes, I've heard it too often, Ian.
That's still evident, unfortunately, in our workplaces, isn't it?
Yeah, too often.
And so maybe the starting place is helping people to have, first of all, conversations with themselves.
Yes.
That help them to overcome the fear and anxiety and all those other emotions.
Completely concur.
Yes. How might we go about that, do you think?
Yeah. Ian, you give me a link there that and it's one of the things I've heard you say over the years, and one thing I say at times is the first thing I've got to do to prepare for a conversation is prepare the state inside me.
Yes.
That I need to take into the conversation. See, your statement about we need to talk, you say that and it becomes a very positive experience because you've got it wired up with your words and your internal state match.
Yes. Yes, that's true. And that is a difficult path to take.
Yeah.
In the early stages.
Sure is.
It's one of the reasons why I did a switch a decade or so ago and really started helping people. You know, my focus becomes self-development and self-expression.
Yeah. Yes.
Because because I just discovered that there were so many people out there who were just, the reason that they were silent in the board meeting is that they were frightened for their futures, as well as not having the skills to have a positive "we need to talk."
Yeah.
And literally, you know, the lack of these conversations over now probably thousands of years,
yes,
is part of the reason we have mess in the world. You know, had we have had proper on the sidelines conversations at the political level, Putin probably wouldn't have invaded Ukraine. It was avoidable, but we didn't have the conversations. I'm absolutely staggered that the American president is about to visit Israel and then Saudi Arabia, and he's not talking to Palestinians. That the message that sends, it's incongruent with what they actually say.
It'd be like me turning up at your place and talking to you and ignoring Carol.
Yep. I mean, it's just appalling, and yet it doesn't appear to be from many in the West to be seen as such.
Yeah.
And I think this is what's gone on. You know, we didn't have the sideline conversations with Putin over the years, and so in the end, he feared the West.
Yes. Yeah.
And took the action that he's taken. I actually understand things from his perspective a little bit. I certainly don't agree with him in any way, shape, or form, but I do understand it. And equally, I understand this kind of, you know, this people are almost chained to the fear of having these difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And so I love this idea of state, which I briefly put a headline over it. It's self-talk.
Yeah, it's in neuroscience we call it a cybernetic circuit. I talk inside my head, which creates an emotional feeling, and the emotional feeling becomes a physiological feeling, and then I verbally and non-verbally respond with an action, which then triggers my next piece of talk.
Yeah.
And the next piece of talk triggers the next emotional response and the next physical response and then the next action. Now, somewhere in that circuit, Ian, I'm consciously or unconsciously making a decision.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, the other thing inside that circuit, there's also a need to stop and go, I've got fear running. How much of the fear is about my belief and my self-talk about my own inadequacy? How much of it's because of what I've actually seen and experienced with this particular situation? Or worse, how much of it is because this situation is similar to one that I've had 5 times before, and now I'm experiencing cumulative fear, which results in projection and transference. Is that getting too technical?
Well, it tells me that we've got to be extremely objective about things with ourselves. It's almost like there's a side conversation going on. Yeah. Isn't it? I know I've had a meditative practice now for almost 50 years. In my case, breath meditation, and it's getting to a place where I'm outside of myself. Yeah. And I think that's the process that I use to have self-talk. And it's this ability and willingness to have an objective conversation with the ego. Yeah. That might be too technical as well.
Not at all. No, it's very in keeping with Gestalt therapy. It's a very much having the different parts of you discuss things with each other is part of the process of Gestalt therapy.
Yes.
And it's very sound, very useful.
The tricky bit often is having that conversation while I'm talking to you.
Well, now you're jumping into somewhere I've been doing some neuroscience research. So I'll just say yes to that one, otherwise I'll get far too technical and boring.
Yeah, look, I think it's one of those things, isn't it? It's the reason I wrote a little playbook called The 15 Conversations That Count.
Yeah.
And I'll put a link to it for the folks that are watching this. I purposely put self-talk number 1.
Nice.
Because I think everything else flows from there. If I can't have an honest conversation with myself,
yeah,
and change or modify or nuance my behavior as a result of that conversation,
yeah,
then all the other conversations, are not going to flow.
Yeah.
And so,
can I jump in? Can I jump in there and make a distinction? In 1993, I did a year of research for Dr. Stephanie Burns, and what I did was interviewed people about their self-talk.
Right.
And
what a fascinating,
being a linguist,
fascinating presenter she was.
She's extraordinary. She's truly extraordinary.
She's still going, is she?
She does work for women in leadership.
Okay, right.
But a very small amount, mostly in the top end of the finance world.
Right.
But she's just finished a master's degree in music.
Right.
Yeah.
She was a fabulous, and well, obviously still is a fabulous example of women in leadership.
She was a remarkable woman.
So the research was in talking to people about their self-talk.
And what I did was a linguistic analysis of the language patterns that were in their self-talk.
Right.
And the most important thing, or a couple of things I identified, was almost all self-talk wasn't a conversation, it was monologue.
What it
was themselves talking to themselves.
Yes.
Now, in that once I discovered that was so prevalent, I then tested a theory that I had. And my theory was that monologue, with a negative bias, would produce fear, doubt, neuroses, paranoia, and panic. And so I then started checking with people what their connection was to their fear, their doubt, their paranoia, and their neuroses and their panic. And of course, there was significant connection.
Yes. Yeah, I'm absolutely, I think you've nailed it with this idea of the monologue. What a fantastic insight.
Yeah. And Ian, the interesting other really important piece was it was almost all statements and few questions. And the majority of the questions that were asked were leading questions and multiple questions, one after the other. And they were almost never answered.
Incredible. Yes, I was fortunate in my early self-work with this in my mid-30s to discover the difference between my ego talking and my higher self talking.
Right.
Now, I mean, that's an Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole we might go down sometime, but I think there's a distinction between our best self and the ego.
It sure is.
And
It sure is.
and therefore there's different questions to ask. I've often had to, as you know, I've done work in the heart leadership space where I hear my heart first. And when I was first learning how to hear my heart first, I had to tell my mind to shut up. Often out loud, I'd turn around and I'd say, be quiet, because that's the ego. And yeah, it's a path we might go down at some point. I think people would value understanding more about the monologue that goes on, and then the different conversations that we can have that lead us out of our fear and into the wonderful land of possibility. But maybe just to the wonderful Jen has sent I've got your matrix now.
Oh, right.
So maybe I'll just share the screen and you can take us through how that works.
It's big and complex. I think it'd be great to move on to that in our next session.
Okay.
And I'd like to give us a link, if I can, to where that would be really pertinent to our current conversation.
Okay.
The connection between monologue and the absence of questions and the above and below the line is pertinent, because you talking about your head and your ego, your voice and your ego and your heart talking, that's the same as what I referred to as their optimism and pessimism ratio. And I think we're talking similar dichotomy, tension.
Yes.
My thinking is, and the other bit that I'd like to throw in is, rather than telling it to go away, I've been working on how to silence it. And I've discovered neurologically, I've discovered that if your peripheral vision's on, you don't have monologue. You don't have internal chatter.
Say that again. I think that's
if I've got, instead of me just looking at Ian, if I look at the whole computer screen and see Ian and Allan, and I notice the chairs and the tables in the room, and I've got my peripheral vision on, the auditory word part of the left hemisphere takes a break and the voice stops.
That's a great insight.
And my belief is, if we can talk about 4 or 5 more solid techniques for switching off the internal chatter, which I believe, Ian, gets in the way of our decision-making process.
No doubt.
If we could have a session which said, these are Allan Parker and Ian Berry's skills and methods that we've used across time to quieten the internal chatter.
Yes. Why don't
then go, how would we make those decisions now if we were in control of that chatter? Does that sound?
I think that's a wonderful place to begin next time.
Yeah.
Because I think
you connecting state and chatter is of paramount importance.
Yes, we had another audio wobble there. We might have to redo this one, Allan, I suggest.
Yeah, I'll have a look at the recording. But I think the content is, particularly in this last half, is extremely rich and important.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
But and you know, I'm happy to accept things with the foibles, but
yes,
I'm equally happy to redo this one.
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Would you leave it with me as soon as I get the recording? I'll sneak a time over the weekend to review it and see how the quality is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
I'll flip it to you as soon as I get it.
Perfect.
But I think it's even leaving this piece as we're concluding to go, how do we deal with a conversation that interrupts conversation? Could be really of value.
Yeah, there's no doubt, because the reason why Mary and John and Harold and Susan didn't speak up in the meeting was because of internal chatter.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Boy, oh boy, hallelujah.
Yeah. And when people recognise that.
Beautiful link.
Yeah, wonderful.
What a beautiful link. Right? Woo! That's called pulling the threads together.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed.
Masterful, Mr. Berry.
All right, mate, we'll leave it there, shall we?
We should. As a springboard for the next one.
Yes, wonderful.
A joy and a pleasure.
Excellent, mate. We'll see you soon.
Take great care. We'll be in touch very soon.
Okay, mate. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.